A teacher shaved a 12-year-old black boy's head in a school nurse's office, ignoring his medical condition, his cries, and his dignity. Malik Johnson's silence spoke louder than any headline. But when his mother, Lieutenant Commander Naomi Ellis, returned from deployment, the fight for justice began. What started as a dress code violation ignited a national reckoning on race, power, and policy. This is the true story of how a mother's discipline and a boy's courage rewrote the rules for everyone. The electric hum of clippers filled the nurse's office as 12-year-old Malik Johnson sat frozen in the chair, braids unraveling, dignity unraveling with them. He had always worn them long, not for style, but for silence, a way to hide the uneven patches alopecia left behind. But in this moment, those braids were being stripped away by someone who saw defiance, where there was only self-preservation. Ms. Reeves, a veteran teacher with a reputation for rigid discipline, watched with an unsettling calm as the school nurse hesitated, then obeyed. Malik's silent protests were drowned out by school policy and unchecked authority. Malik wasn't disruptive. He wasn't failing. He was a gifted student who rarely spoke up. The kind of black boy America often calls promising until it decides he's problematic. That morning, he had simply chosen to exist in a body that didn't meet someone else's expectations of neatness. But the school didn't see trauma management or cultural expression. It saw a rule broken. In a country where black students are disciplined at disproportionately higher rates, where appearance codes often masquerade as neutral but punish natural hair and cultural identity, this wasn't just a haircut. It was erasure. What the district didn't know was that Malik's father, a logistics officer with 2 decades of Army service, was already boarding a flight home. The school thought it had resolved the matter with a 1-day suspension for the teacher, but they hadn't silenced a problem. They'd ignited a reckoning. Malik Johnson didn't say a word as his father picked him up from the school's front office. The sun outside was bright, almost cruelly cheerful. He held a hoodie over his freshly shaved scalp, the same one his best friend Jalen had wrapped around him after everything fell apart. The ride home was quiet, the air inside the SUV dense with unspoken emotions. Master Sergeant Desmond Johnson, a seasoned Army logistician just home from a supply chain inspection in Germany, clenched the steering wheel tight enough that his knuckles turned white. He'd spent years managing battlefield chaos, but nothing had prepared him for the look in his son's eyes, hollow, detached, like something essential had been stolen. At home, Malik walked straight to his room and shut the door. He didn't eat, didn't speak, just curled up with a pillow pressed against his chest and the hoodie still clutched in his fists. The school's automated email arrived by evening. An incident occurred involving student Malik Johnson and a faculty member. The situation has been addressed, and appropriate disciplinary action has been taken. Due to privacy concerns, further details cannot be shared. The teacher had received a 1-day suspension, no mention of the clippers, no mention of Malik's medical exemption filed the previous semester, no mention of his screams. The school believed this would be enough. The system had done what it always did: contain the narrative, shift the focus, minimize the damage. It wasn't just cowardice, it was policy. National statistics show black boys as young as 9 are viewed as older, less innocent, and more culpable than their white peers. In schools, This bias translates into harsher discipline for minor infractions and a higher likelihood of their needs being overlooked. Dress codes, ostensibly created to maintain order, have repeatedly been shown to disproportionately target black students for hairstyles rooted in cultural identity. Malik's braids weren't rebellion, they were armor, and the school had ripped them away. Inside Lakeside Intermediate's administration building, the real discussion wasn't about Malik. It was about Principal Darren Coates, 59 and weeks from retirement, paced the length of his office, flanked by Vice Principal Liza Trent and Legal Counsel Martin Kravitz. "It's a viral risk," Kravitz said flatly. "There's a phone recording. We don't know how long it is or where it cuts off. We need to stay ahead of it." Trent offered. "The teacher claims she was enforcing Code 4.5, visual distractions related to hairstyle or grooming." "She shaved a kid's head," Coates muttered. "What's that? Compliance?" Their solution: a carefully worded letter to parents, a symbolic suspension, and a call to district HR to start drafting fallback statements. When pressed on camera later, they'd call it a misunderstanding, one rooted in policy, not malice. Back in his room, Malik began to draw again. Not people, not stories, just lines, hard, jagged shapes, black ink on page after page. His favorite sketchbook lay untouched. He didn't want to look at the birds he used to draw, not when he felt like one with clipped wings. Desmond sat in the living room, phone to his ear, voice tight with grief. "You hurt my son," he told the voicemail of Principal Coates. "You let it happen, and then you tried to hide it." He didn't yell, he didn't threaten. He simply added, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." By morning, the video Jalen had captured had already been viewed 18,000 times. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By the time Lieutenant Commander Naomi Ellis stepped off the military transport plane at Andrews Air Force Base, the video had crossed 1 million views. Her inbox was flooded. Military brass, childhood friends, advocacy groups, strangers. Everyone had something to say, but all Naomi cared about was her son. She hadn't even changed out of flight suit. The fatigue weighed on her bones, but the rage kept her upright. She'd spent the past 3 weeks embedded with a humanitarian logistics unit in Djibouti, coordinating vaccine delivery to refugee camps. She'd seen chaos. She'd calmed it. But nothing had prepared her for the voicemail Desmond had left. Or the video. Malik Hood pulled over his scalp, being dragged down a hallway by a teacher 3 times his size, eyes wide, face crumpled with shame. No sound in the clip, but Naomi didn't need audio. She could hear her son's silence loud and clear. Desmond met her at the arrivals gate with a look that said everything. This was war. They drove straight to the school. No phone call, no meeting request, no waiting. Naomi moved through the hallways of Lakeside Intermediate like a missile locked on target. She was tall, with a presence sharpened by command. The click of her boots on the tile turned heads. Teachers peered out of doorways. Students stopped mid-conversation. Naomi didn't slow down. Inside the faculty lounge, Ms. Reeves was pouring herself coffee when the door flew open. She turned, startled, and nearly dropped the cup. "Lieutenant Commander Ellis," she stammered. Naomi didn't smile. "You recognize me," she said. "I didn't know you were back in the country." "No," Naomi replied coldly. "You didn't know I was watching." The room emptied as other teachers suddenly remembered they had things to do elsewhere. Reeves backed toward the window. "Look, this isn't what you think. Your son was out of dress code. There was no documentation. I filed it myself last fall, Naomi snapped. Twice, through the proper chain. You ignored it. Reeves's eyes darted toward the hallway. This is all a misunderstanding. Naomi stepped closer. You put your hands on my son. You humiliated him, then you lied about it. I was following school protocol. No, Naomi said. You were settling a score. Reeves froze. The words had landed. I remember Fort Leonard Wood, Naomi said. 2011. You were Private First Class Reeves then. Failed out of my field logistics course after 3 warnings and 1 fraudulent complaint. You said I singled you out. You did, Reeves barked, voice cracking. I held you accountable. Naomi corrected. You weren't ready then, and you're not fit to lead now. Reeves looked like she might speak again, but Naomi raised a hand. If you ever come near my child again, she said calmly, you'll understand why my unit called me the Fixer. Naomi walked out without another word. She didn't wait for apologies. She wasn't interested in explanations. She had work to do. Back at home, Malik was sitting at the kitchen table, silently sketching. Naomi knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. I saw the video, she said softly. I'm here now. He didn't look up, but he didn't pull away either. That night, Naomi didn't sleep. Instead, she opened her laptop and began build her case. Every form filed, every policy document copied, every witness statement logged. She cross-referenced state education code with federal disability protections. She reached out to legal contacts, veterans groups, public health experts. She didn't need to shout into the void. She knew how to dismantle systems from the inside. And this time, she wasn't operating under classified orders. She was doing it for her son. The morning after Naomi's return, the world outside her home was already shifting. Malik's story had moved beyond social media chatter. It was now breaking news. The video had been featured on local affiliates, and by noon, a national outlet had picked it up under the headline, Student with Medical Condition Forcibly Shaved at School. Comment sections exploded. Hashtags like Number Justice for Malik and Number Hair is Not a Distraction were trending across platforms. But the virality didn't come from the headline alone. It was the story behind the story that captured the internet's imagination. A silent black boy, a military mother with steel in her spine, and an institution that didn't think anyone would push back. Naomi, however, wasn't looking for likes or shares. She was looking for patterns, and she didn't have to search long. By evening, dozens of messages flooded her inbox from other parents, mostly black, some Latino, a few indigenous, each with stories eerily similar to Malik's. Braids called too flamboyant, natural curls labeled unkempt, and in one case, a boy suspended for wearing a durag his mother had sewn to protect a scalp condition. The thread was clear. Schools weren't just enforcing policy. They were policing identity. Naomi called an emergency meeting with a local legal clinic that had handled education discrimination cases. Sitting in a cramped conference room with 3 volunteer attorneys and a civil rights fellow, she laid out what she'd gathered: parent testimonies, screenshots, dress code inconsistencies, even an internal email from a substitute teacher who'd overheard staff at Lakeside mocking the overreaction to Malik's case. This isn't a mistake, Naomi said, pointing to a spreadsheet of student infractions she'd anonymized. It's a system, a culture. One attorney leaned forward, nodding. It looks like you've uncovered what amounts to discriminatory enforcement, under color of administrative policy. "And we're just getting started," Naomi replied. While Naomi built her case, Malik's best friend, Jalen, took a different path. He began posting daily updates to TikTok, documenting everything, from the school's silence to Naomi's return. One of the clips, showing Malik quietly sketching under a hoodie, captioned, "My best friend ain't said a word since they cut his hair," hit 3 million views in 48 hours. With it came more stories, more voices. Alumni of Lakeside began speaking out. One former student, now a junior in college, posted a long Twitter thread recounting how Ms. Reeves once made her wash off makeup in front of the class because it was too urban. Another shared that a teacher had called his dreadlocks dirty during a science lab. A teacher from another school district commented anonymously, "We've known about Ms. Reeves for years. She just never got caught on camera until now." Naomi reached out to a local activist group that organized around school equity. They offered connections to journalists, legal advisors, and policy analysts. Within days, the story evolved from isolated outrage to organized effort. Petitions started circulating. The superintendent's inbox was flooded. Parents began demanding transparency from the school board. Still, Naomi didn't rush. She strategized. Every piece of evidence was vetted, time-stamped, and corroborated. She wasn't just building a lawsuit. She was building a case for change, and she was meticulous. Across the country, schools were facing increasing scrutiny for how their dress codes disproportionately affected students of color. Recent data showed black girls were 5.5 times more likely to be suspended over appearance-related infractions than white girls. For boys, the number hovered near 4.3. While these policies rarely mention race, their application reveals the bias beneath the language. Naomi knew that data wasn't enough. What moved people was story, emotion, faces. So she partnered with a local filmmaker and started recording interviews with Malik when he was ready, with parents, and with students who had once been silenced. The footage would later become a documentary, short-screened, at a regional education conference. Meanwhile, Malik's drawings began to change. They weren't just abstract lines anymore. They told stories. One page showed a classroom with a boy disappearing into mist, while other students looked on, faceless and frozen. Another showed a phoenix rising from clippers tossed into flames. He still didn't talk much, but his art spoke volumes. By the end of the week, a local station aired a full segment on Malik's case. It included new revelations, emails confirming the administration had received Malik's medical exemption form, ignored it, and told staff to keep responses minimal to avoid escalation. The district called it a breakdown in communication. Parents called it what it was, a cover-up. The next day, a rally formed in front of the district headquarters. Dozens of families showed up, holding signs, chanting Malik's name, reading statements of their own. One woman held a cardboard poster that read, "My child is not a policy violation." And for the first time, Malik stood beside his mom, wrapped in the hoodie Jalen had given him. He didn't speak, but he didn't have to. The silence had already become a roar. 6 weeks after Malik Johnson's story first captured national attention, the courtroom was packed. Every bench was filled. Journalists lined the back wall. Protesters held signs outside the courthouse, while civil rights groups waited for updates under pop-up tents. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, solemn. At the center of it all sat Malik, now 13, dressed in a navy sweater and khakis. He sat between his parents, eyes forward, hands folded in his lap. His scalp was still shaved, though the first hints of new growth peeked through. The trial of Johnson versus Lakeside Unified School District, Principal Darren Coates, and teacher Evelyn Reeves had officially begun. Naomi Ellis, seated beside her attorney Marla Singh, a fierce education litigator known for her work dismantling systemic bias, looked every bit the career officer she was. Her civilian blazer was neatly pressed, her posture as straight as if she were in uniform. But this wasn't a military tribunal. This was about her son, and she had no intention of letting decorum stand in the way of justice. Opening arguments began with Singh laying out the case. That Malik, a medically documented alopecia patient, had been targeted, humiliated, and physically violated by a teacher under the guise of dress code enforcement. That the school had ignored multiple filings and used loopholes in policy to cover their tracks. And that the trauma inflicted on Malik wasn't a one-time error. It was the inevitable result of a system that dehumanized black students under the banner of discipline. The defense leaned hard on policy. Attorney Paul Vickers, representing the school district, claimed there was no malicious intent. He argued the teacher acted in good faith, and that, due to communication errors between administrative departments, the exemption paperwork had not reached the appropriate personnel in time. Miscommunication is not misconduct, Vickers told the jury. We are not here to dispute the boy's condition. We're here to determine whether protocol, flawed though it may be, was followed. Singh countered immediately. Protocols are not shields, she said, not when they're weaponized against children who don't fit a preferred image of conformity. As the trial continued, the courtroom saw a procession of witnesses. First came the school nurse, who admitted tearfully that she had followed Ms. Reeves's instruction without verifying the claim of parental permission. I should have checked. I didn't. I'll regret that for the rest of my life, she said, her voice cracking. Then came Jalen, Malik's friend, who had recorded the viral video. We weren't trying to start anything, Jalen said, clutching the mic nervously. We just wanted someone to know what really happened. On day 3, the court admitted evidence Naomi's team had recovered. A cached copy of the school's digital system showing that Malik's medical exemption had been filed and approved 5 months before the incident. Attached was a staff-wide memo signed by Principal Coates, stating, "Ensure students with exemption flags are not subjected to code violations without verification." Singh held the printed memo in the air. "Mr. Coates," she asked, "did you sign this?" "I did," he admitted, avoiding eye contact. "And yet your staff claims they were unaware of Malik's exemption." "I can't speak to what each employee saw." He deflected. "You sent the memo." "Yes, and then you ignored it." The silence in the room was heavy. Later that afternoon, Naomi was called to the stand. She spoke with clarity and calm, describing the steps she took to file the paperwork, her military deployment, and the call she received from her husband the day of the incident. "I've given 20 years of my life to protecting this country," she said, "but I never imagined I'd have to protect my son from the people meant to educate him." When Singh asked why she refused multiple settlement offers from the district, Naomi responded simply, "Because no amount of money restores dignity." Then came Malik, A special arrangement had been made. He testified via closed-circuit feed from a separate room, accompanied by a trauma counselor. When asked what he remembered about the day, his voice was soft but steady. I asked her to stop. I told her I had a condition. I told her to call my mom or dad. "And what did she say?" Singh prompted. "She said rules are rules. She said nobody's above them." "And how did that make you feel?" There was a long pause. "Like I wasn't a person," Malik finally said. "Like I didn't matter." The courtroom was silent. One juror wiped a tear from her cheek. The defense tried to pivot, calling Ms. Reeves to the stand. She appeared polished, calm, even sympathetic, until cross-examination, when Singh asked whether she was aware Naomi Ellis had once been her commanding officer in a failed military training program. Reeves's tone shifted. "She made my life hell." Reeves muttered. "Is that why you targeted her son?" "No," Reeves snapped. "I followed policy." "Is that why you ignored a crying child? Because of policy?" Reeves didn't answer. She just stared straight ahead. The turning point came with the final piece of evidence, a recovered email chain between Reeves and another staff member. In it, Reeves wrote, "The Ellis kids getting too comfortable. Time to teach some humility." The courtroom erupted. Judge Evelyn Harmon called for order. Singh closed her case with a single line. "This was never about hair. This was about control." The verdict landed like a seismic wave. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous decision. The school district, Principal Darren Coates, and teacher Evelyn Reeves were all liable on every count. Civil rights violations, negligence, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Damages exceeded $10 million, one of the largest education-related awards in the state's history. But money wasn't the headline. The cultural aftershock was. The morning after the ruling, the district office was surrounded by news vans and a growing crowd of parents, former students, and community leaders. Some held signs that read, "We stand with Malik." Others raised placards demanding resignations. Across social media, the case was trending under multiple hashtags: #Malik Matters, #dress code disgrace, and #school should be safe. That week, Principal Coates submitted his resignation, effective immediately. His statement cited deep regret for the pain caused and a desire not to distract from healing. But internal emails later leaked showed a district lawyer had advised him to step down before disciplinary action was imposed. Ms. Reeves, meanwhile, faced both professional and criminal consequences. With her teaching license under review, she was placed on unpaid leave. A criminal investigation was launched following new allegations from former students. Claims of repeated discriminatory enforcement and verbal intimidation stretching back years. One student recounted how Reeves had once told her, "You'll never get anywhere with hair like that," before sending her home with a mark on her record. But the most sweeping change came not from punishment, but from policy. The state's Department of Education announced an emergency review of all school appearance codes. Within days, it issued a directive to suspend any dress code enforcement policies related to hair, unless accompanied by clearly documented, medically necessary guidelines and equity reviews. In collaboration with child development experts and cultural historians, the department began drafting a model appearance policy to be adopted statewide. It would prioritize inclusivity, prevent race-based targeting, and require accountability audits every school year. Across districts, superintendents scrambled to get ahead of the tide. Local school boards hosted public forums. Teachers received emergency training on implicit bias, trauma-informed practices, and the legal boundaries of disciplinary authority. School resource officers were advised to avoid involvement in appearance-related conflicts entirely. Meanwhile, Naomi Ellis wasn't finished. Rather than retreat into quiet satisfaction, she launched the Project Dignity Initiative, a non-profit dedicated to protecting students' rights within the education system. The project offered legal assistance, public awareness campaigns, and resources for families navigating discrimination. Within 2 weeks, over 200 families had reached out. Most were parents of black or brown children who'd faced similar situations. Suspensions over protective hairstyles, uniforms enforced differently based on race, and students with disabilities shamed over appearance-based symptoms. Malik, though still processing his trauma, began attending art therapy sessions provided through the initiative. His sketches, once guarded and solitary, started showing signs of transformation, bolder strokes, brighter color. In one piece, a young boy stood tall on a school stage, hair wild and free, surrounded not by judgmental classmates, but applause. The school board, facing intense public pressure and a civil rights complaint filed by a national watchdog group, appointed a new interim principal, Carla Monroe, a former middle school dean known for restorative discipline practices and cultural equity leadership. Her first act, removing the district's outdated dress code and replacing it with a simple 5-word statement: "We respect the bodies we teach." Under Monroe's leadership, the district formed a task force, including parents, students, teachers, and cultural experts, to rebuild policies from the ground up. Malik's case had forced a reckoning. Now it was forcing a renaissance. Outside Lakeside Intermediate, a new banner hung beside the entrance. In white letters against deep blue, it read, "Every child, every voice, every right." The air inside the Community Art Center buzzed with energy. It was opening night for Reclaim, a gallery exhibition of student work focused on identity, resilience, and transformation. And at the heart of it was Malik Johnson. His piece, a mixed-media canvas titled Uncut, sat at the center of the room. It showed a silhouette of a black boy, head held high, surrounded by fragmented mirrors. Each shard reflected a different version of him, one with braids, one bald, one smiling, one silent. Together they told a story not just of trauma, but of reclamation. Malik, now 13 and finally speaking freely again, stood by the door with his mom and dad, shaking hands, answering questions, and sometimes just watching. He wasn't the same boy who'd hidden behind a hoodie in the nurse's office. That boy still existed, but he wasn't alone anymore. The exhibit marked more than an artistic milestone. It was a turning point. Naomi Ellis had spent the past 4 months expanding the Project Dignity Initiative into a national coalition. They'd partnered with civil rights attorneys, pediatric psychologists, and grassroots organizers to offer training, legal assistance, and storytelling platforms for families across the country. Their website housed a growing archive of student testimonies, advocacy toolkits, and a searchable database of school policies flagged for racial or ableist bias. One tab read, "Submit your story." Hundreds had. Meanwhile, school districts in Illinois, Georgia, and California had begun revising their codes. citing Malik's case as a catalyst. Legislators introduced new bills mandating transparency around disciplinary actions tied to appearance, many modeled after the initiative's proposed Student Dignity Bill of Rights. The proposed legislation included protections for medically necessary accommodations, a ban on hair-based punishment, and funding for equity audits at the state level. For Malik, healing wasn't instant. He still had days where silence felt safer, but art helped. Therapy helped. So did the letters, dozens of them, some from students who had gone through something similar, others from adults who never got the chance to fight back, but were grateful someone finally had. And then there was Maya. She had seen Malik's video on her cousin's phone, then started researching what had happened. A high school junior in Maryland, she launched a podcast called Crowned, centered on the stories of black boys and girls who'd been disciplined for their appearance. In her first episode, she read from her middle school journal. They made me feel like my curls were a crime. Maya's podcast exploded in popularity. By her 5th episode, she was interviewing lawmakers. By the 7th, she had Malik on as a guest. He didn't say much, but what he did say landed. "I used to think being quiet was safer," he said. "Now I think speaking makes me stronger." The clip was shared by civil rights groups, news anchors, and celebrities. It even aired during a special town hall on education equity, hosted by a major network. Later that month, Malik received a letter from the Smithsonian. They wanted to feature his artwork in an exhibit on student-led activism. With Naomi's help, he wrote back, "Yes, but not just my art, my story." Because Malik Johnson wasn't just a student anymore. He was a movement. A year after the incident, the Johnson family stood quietly on the courthouse steps. The building behind them was no longer a symbol of fear or frustration. It was where they'd drawn a line and refused to back down. Malik wore a forest green blazer and a button pinned to his lapel that read, "My hair, my right." He had started 8th grade just a month earlier, not at Lakeside, but at a new school with a new principal and a student body that had read his story before they met him. He still wore his hair natural, growing into thick coils. He took pride in shaping himself each morning. Naomi looked out across the street, where a mural had just been finished on the side of the local community center. It showed a classroom full of kids, black, brown, white, with curls, hijabs, afros, braids, and bald heads. At the center stood a teacher not giving instructions, but listening. Above them, the words read, "Learning begins with respect." Across the country, the ripple effects continued. The Student Dignity Bill of Rights had passed in 3 states and was being reviewed federally. Public schools in over 40 districts had revised their appearance codes, and Project Dignity now had 14 full-time staffers, fielding over 300 cases of reported bias in education. But the real legacy wasn't in courtrooms or policy briefs. It was in the classroom, where a black student no longer feared judgment for how they looked. It was in the art studio, where pain became story. It was in every child who learned that their identity wasn't a problem to be corrected, but a truth to be honored. Malik didn't just survive injustice. He redrew it.